Social anxiety isn't new. I once stood outside a dinner party for 11 minutes because I couldn't make my hand knock on the door. I could hear people laughing inside. It was my friend's apartment, people I actually liked, and a bottle of wine going warm in my grip. And I just stood there on the landing, rehearsing a normal greeting like it was a hostage negotiation, until someone opened the door to leave and found me looking like a census taker who'd lost his nerve. I bring this up because, for most of history, there was no word for what was happening to me on that landing. The fear had no name, no diagnosis, no support group, and in the 1800s, an entire class of people felt that exact dread so intensely that they simply stopped coming out. Not for an evening, for decades. The Victorians didn't call it social anxiety. They called these people recluses, eccentrics, or if you were wealthy enough, simply private. And some of them built entire lives and entire houses around never having to knock on that door at all. The patron saint of this whole phenomenon has to be William Cavendish Scott Bentinck, the 5th Duke of Portland, who inherited one of the largest fortunes in England and used it to make sure he would almost never have to look at another human being. At his estate, Welbeck Abbey in Nottinghamshire, he had a network of tunnels dug beneath the grounds. Not one tunnel, but miles of them. One passage ran wide enough for 2 carriages and stretched over a mile, so he could travel from his house toward the railway without being seen above ground. He built an enormous underground ballroom that, as far as anyone can tell, never hosted a single dance. He had a suite of rooms painted pink. When he needed medical attention, his doctor was reportedly required to stand outside the bedroom door and take his pulse through a partly open gap, diagnosing one of the richest men in the country by watching a wrist float in a doorway. Servants at Welbeck were given a standing instruction. If they passed the Duke, they were to walk by as though he were a tree, and anyone who acknowledged him risked dismissal. Here's the part historians actually argue about. For years, the Duke was written up as pure eccentricity, the punchline of 100 mad aristocrat stories. But when you line up the behaviors, the avoidance of eye contact, the elaborate systems built purely to dodge face-to-face contact, the refusal to be seen even by his own staff, it reads less like whimsy and more like a man engineering his entire estate around a fear he had no language for. What clinicians today would recognize as avoidance behavior, the systematic restructuring of your entire life to escape social exposure, he had the money to build directly into the architecture. Most people didn't. The Duke could afford to turn his fear into a mile of tunnel, but everyone else had to survive the social rules as written, and those rules were brutal in a way that's easy to underestimate. Victorian etiquette wasn't loose guidance. It was a coded system with real penalties for getting it wrong, and it governed almost every interaction outside your own family. There were manuals for this, sold by the hundreds of thousands. There were correct and incorrect ways to leave a calling card, and folding the corner the wrong way sent a message you might not have meant to send. You could not simply introduce yourself to someone. You needed a third party to do it, and skipping that go-between marked you as ignorant or worse. A woman walking, speaking, or being introduced in the wrong sequence could damage her family's standing. Get the choreography wrong, and the punishment wasn't a bad evening. It was a quiet, permanent downgrade in how people treated you. Now imagine navigating that entire apparatus while your heart is trying to climb out of your chest. For someone wired toward that dinner party dread, this wasn't a minor inconvenience. Every visit was an exam with rules you could fail without ever being told which one you'd broken. So people opted out. Historians of the period point to a recognizable figure, especially among unmarried women of comfortable means, who gradually stopped receiving visitors, stopped returning cards, and folded inward, until the outside world became something that happened to other people. The medical language of the day didn't help. What we might now frame as an anxiety condition got labeled as nerves or hysteria or a delicate constitution, and the prescribed cure was often more isolation, rest, quiet, fewer visitors. The treatment for being afraid of people was to see even fewer of them. Let me stop the history lecture for a second, because it would be easy to watch all this from a safe distance. A duke in his tunnels, women fainting onto chaise longues, quaint, filtered through sepia, safely someone else's problem, dead for 150 years. But you already know the feeling. Maybe not the tunnels. Maybe it's the text you've left on read for 3 days because replying feels like too much. The party you said yes to and then spent the whole afternoon quietly hoping would get canceled. The phone call you'll do anything to turn into an email. That's avoidance behavior. Different century, identical mechanics. The Victorians didn't have a word for it, so they built houses and diagnoses and entire social exiles around it. You have a word for it, and a phone that lets you decline the invitation without ever standing on the landing. Different century, same 11 minutes outside the door. The tools got better at helping us avoid the thing. The thing didn't go anywhere. By the end of the century, a few people were starting to describe it more honestly. In the 1890s, the French physician Pierre Janet was writing about patients gripped by an intense dread of being watched and judged, people who couldn't perform ordinary acts if they thought a single pair of eyes was on them. He explicitly grouped these cases alongside agoraphobia, the fear of open or public spaces, noting that both conditions shared the same root terror of exposure and judgment. He didn't have the clean modern label either, but he was circling it, describing in careful clinical detail the same fear that had put the Duke of Portland behind a mile of dirt. It would take until 1966 for the term social phobia to enter the psychiatric literature in a serious way, through the work of the psychiatrist Isaac Marks and his colleague Michael Gelder. That's the arithmetic worth sitting with. From the Duke dying alone at Welbeck in 1879 to a formal name for what he likely had is nearly a century. Generations of people felt this and were handed the vocabulary of eccentricity, nerves, or bad character instead. And even 1966 wasn't the finish line. The real clinical legitimization came in 1980 when social phobia was formally included in the DSM-3, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, making it an official psychiatric diagnosis for the first time. Before 1980, even psychiatrists could debate whether it was real. After 1980, it was on the books. That shift didn't just change how doctors talked about it. It eventually opened the door to actual treatments, exposure therapy, where you face the feared situation in controlled, graduated steps, and cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which addresses the thought patterns driving the avoidance. The Duke only had architecture. Today, there are evidence-based tools designed specifically for the thing he was building tunnels to escape. Which brings me back to that landing. 11 minutes, a warm bottle of wine, and a door I couldn't make myself knock on. The difference between me and the Duke of Portland isn't the fear, it's the century. He had a fortune and no name for it, so he spent the money digging tunnels away from the world. I had a word for it, a therapist's phone number, and a friend on the other side of that door who, when it finally opened, just said, "Oh good, you're here," and took the wine. The Duke never got that door open for him. He just kept digging.